So I wanted to kind of just walk through an example together of what a paragraph like this will look like. Okay. So we have a paragraph about a negative association with reading. And you'll see that it's color coded here with topic, sentence, discussion, examples, explanation, significance. So if you want to pause and read through this, you can. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about paragraphing. Okay. So this is kind of common information, right? These are things that you've hopefully have learned in the past that, academic paragraphs generally have really common features. Okay. And most of the time, they're going to contain three parts. Okay, so you have your claim or your topic sentence. You're going to have your support and evidence for that claim, and then you're going to have some kind of closing connecting sentence. Okay, so for your topic sentence and claim, okay, you really want to think about what you're saying in a particular paragraph, what you want your reader to kind of walk away with. Okay. So that first sentence in a paragraph is usually going to tell a reader what claim will be made and supported in that particular paragraph. Okay. So as an aside, not all academic paragraphs will have the topic sentence as the very first sentence, but it is a common strategy. Okay. And then when we think about claims, we think about something that you are arguing or something that you're stating that others could agree with. Okay. So you really want to kind of make an argument, make a claim. Okay. Don't just maybe give us factual information, right? When you think about your identification of a trend of your classmates, right, you might identify something that another classmate might disagree with, or you might identify something that someone else didn't really notice, right? So you want to make sure that you're making a very strong claim. Okay. And I want to make sure that your topic sentence is about kind of your ideas. So it's not really an idea just about one particular source, right? You are looking at a variety of sources and coming up with a statement that you can make about entry level first year college students. Okay. So when we think about some claims, right, you could say, oh, it's hot outside. If students don't study, they don't get good grades. Star Wars is the best movie, right? These are all things that people could disagree with. Okay. I would say one example of a claim is UC Davis students who take UWP 7 are more prepared to write in upper division classes than students who don't take UWP 7, right? That is something that people could agree with or disagree with, right? But you're really making a point. And you're kind of telling your audience, this is what I'm going to argue in this paragraph. Okay. So if we go back to this sample paragraph, I've highlighted the topic sentence. And the topic sentence for this sample paragraph, which is about the negative association with reading. The topic sentence says the reading habits of UWP 7 students shift from required assigned reading to a more diverse selection of reading material as students get older, right? So we know that this paragraph is going to be about that shift, right? And then, of course, we want support, right? We can't just make a claim. We have to prove that this claim is true. And then there's common types of support. You're going to have explanation, discussion, and analysis. And you're also going to have support and sources. Okay. So when we think about explanation and analysis, that can show up in a couple different ways, right? We'll have discussion of a trend, explanation of a trend, right? So if you look at the first bolded sentence there in green, okay, that is discussion. So that's kind of giving us more information about the topic that we're discussing, right? So we started off with there's a shift. And then we can go into that discussion that many students associate negative emotions with academic reading, finding it tedious and time consuming. The responses illustrate that students were often constrained to books assigned by parents or teachers during their early years, limiting their freedom to explore personal interests. So that is a discussion of that trend, right? It's making some general statements about the trend. Okay. And then you'll see later on, there's explanation, right? So highlighted or bolded in that blue area, we see that this restriction led to a widespread negative association with reading, as it was perceived as an obligation rather than a source of enjoyment. However, as students grew older, they discovered the freedom to choose books and other reading materials that generally interest them. So that's explaining more about the trend, explaining those examples that we'll talk about in a second, right? And kind of saying, okay, here's why they're important. Here's what we should learn from those things, right? So we're explaining the support, the examples, the sources. So, in addition to kind of that explanation, making some general statements, generalizations, we also need really specific support. Okay, so make sure that you're watching the genre of source reference video because I want you to learn a little bit more about paraphrasing. Okay, so for this assignment, you'll see on the actual assignment sheet that I've asked you to use examples of the trend using summary and paraphrase, no quotes. Okay. One of the things that we'll talk about more and more over the course of the quarter is that academic writing does not rely on quotes as much as maybe we think it does. Okay. And we'll talk more about why that is. But the most common types of source reference is summary and paraphrase. Okay. So I want you to summarize and paraphrase what your classmates are saying to help you support a point about a trend. Okay. I also want you to use the last name year attribution, right? Because in this class, we're going to talk about using APA. So we kind of want to move away from, MLA that oftentimes asks us to use like full names and titles of the publication piece. For APA, when we do in-text citation, we just use the last name and the year. So you'll see that I've highlighted that here, okay, where we have Torres 2024. Okay. So that's one of the things that I want you to think about when you're referencing things that your classmates have said. Okay. And that's basically what support is going to look like for these two paragraphs, right? You're only going to be using your classmates as support to provide examples. Okay. So we have, here where Chin and Torres both mention, and then you can kind of paraphrase what they say about maybe being constrained to books assigned by parents and teachers. Okay. And then you could follow that up with another example where you say it's also apparent when Padman says, and then you can summarize what she says about being restricted to certain types of reading. Okay, so for this practice assignment, the only sources you're going to be using are your classmates. Okay. And you'll see here that I've highlighted another section where you could possibly use some examples. Okay. If you make the point that as students grow older, they discover the freedom to choose books and other reading materials that interest them, you could follow that up with an example from maybe another classmate. And again, we're only using classmates. We're not using readings for this assignment. Okay. And then, of course, you have some kind of closing or connecting sentence at the end of a paragraph, right? Where we want to kind of wrap everything up. So we're signaling the end of an idea. When we talk about, paragraphing for full essays, you also want kind of those closing sentences to connect and lead into the next paragraph or idea, or kind of remind the reader how the idea in this paragraph connects to like your overall point of the paper. Those are things that you're going to want to do when we're talking about essay length or essays or papers, right? But I don't want you to worry about that part in the box for application assignment 3 because you're writing standalone paragraphs, right? So we're not leading into the next idea or transitioning into another idea. So really you're just signaling the end of one idea. So we could look down here in the purple where that closing sentence is really kind of identifying the significance of the trend, kind of the importance of it. So we see right there the word significance. The significance of this trend lies in the power of independent choice. It emphasizes the importance of allowing individuals the space to explore their own interests, fostering a lifelong love for reading rather than seeing it as a chore. Right? So that really wraps that paragraph up and discusses the significance, because definitely you want to explain what the significance is. And you'll see there's kind of a balance in this paragraph, right? Where we have some discussion, we have some examples, we have some discussion, we have some possible other examples, then we have the significance, right? So this is what a paragraph that you write for practice assignment 3 might look like. So again, if we look at the assignment, just like before with the other assignments, you'll make a copy of this document and you're going to write 2 paragraphs. Okay. I want you to label the paragraphs, right, with a really quick kind of note here. And you, like this example here, there's a paragraph about negative association with reading. So you would just write paragraph about negative association with reading, or you might write a paragraph about the love of writing. Okay. So just tell us what the paragraph is, because when you submit this to Eli Review, I do want you to kind of copy that whole thing so we have those paragraph titles.